Hello Hastings, I'm Tom Wright, and I am in the lovely home of Miss Donna Mathiowetz. Donna, thank you for having us here.
Thanks for coming.
It's a pleasure to be here. The reason we're here is Donna is a local inspirational speaker as well as a published author. We're here to talk about her new book that just came out, A Journal for Your Journey. I'm going to see if I can hold that right for our close-up. Great book. I will say right up front, Donna, and to you at home, anybody who has suffered a loss, this is a great book to grab. And it's right on your website, Unfinished by Design, I believe.
That's right.
Great. And before we get into your journey, let's talk about what you're up to right now. Catch everybody up.
Well, it's been exciting. That was published and brought out, it's almost a year ago now. It was last spring that I began to work on it, and about May or June it was ready to go. So it's been a fun year of, I didn't quite know what I was going to be getting into, but as it turns out, I've had various speaking opportunities at very different venues than maybe I would have thought of or that anybody might think. I do my share of talking to grief support groups throughout the metro and all, but I had a client last November that I spoke at. LifeSource is a organ procurement organization. And every November, the one from Minneapolis, LifeSource from Minneapolis, does a gathering for their family, the donor family gathering. So these are all the folks who have lost a loved one, who donated an organ or eyes or tissue or whatever, and they honor them in November. And so I was their keynote speaker in Sioux Falls, North Dakota, and also two different times on a Saturday at the Arboretum. So it was really cool. Just a wonderful event. Tough stuff because these people a lot of them are newly grieving people, but what a wonderful organization it is that their death meant somebody else lives and lives in a healthy way. So, but other than that, I'm going to be speaking just tonight. I'll be at a funeral home in Forest Lake, speaking as a community outreach thing that the funeral home is sponsoring. I've spoken to inmates at the county jail here in Hastings. I've spoken at the vet's home. So all kinds of different resources that have, some have just contacted me and say, hey, would you consider coming? But as you and I were talking before we started, Tom, this whole topic of grief is universal. Right. And we're all everyone throughout their lifetime is going to lose something or someone of great value to them. And if it's not you yet, you probably know someone else who has or is going through that right now. So there's a great need out there to become more open about talking about this thing that everybody wishes they could skip, but we don't get to do that.
Absolutely. Yeah. The idea for this book, when did that come about? How did this come about?
Well, it came about because I wanted to, and I'm in the midst of writing another book, the book which will share our whole story in a lot more detail with not just Tim's story, but Oleg, our foster son, who we had for a while, and he passed away 2 years after Tim did from cancer, and foster children after that from foreign countries. We have quite a rich story of a life that we never planned. It's not how we planned it. So I was going to write the book, and they say whenever you're going to do something new, find someone who's a little ways ahead of you on the path and find out what they know. Don't have to make all our own mistakes in life, right? So,
right, very wise.
So I had met Annie Meehan at a networking group, and she had written a couple books, and she was a coach, and so I hired her to do some coaching with me. And she said, I get you should write a book, definitely, but you want to do some speaking and you want to get going on that sooner than later. And she said, have you thought about something for the back of the room? Because the truth is that sometimes when you speak, the organizations don't have a big budget to hire a speaker. But I can always sell something in the back of the room. So it was kind of partly a business decision, but it turned out that it was a wonderful one because it came together so fast. From the time I decided to write the journal and met with somebody in Burnsville who was helping me self-publish it, it was just a matter of 3 months, and I had 100 of the garage ready to sell. So it came around very fast as I quickly wrote these very short little excerpts from our experience after Tim's death. Yes.
Wow. Speaking of Tim's death,
yes.
what a story. Could you please share what you're comfortable sharing and what led you to this career that you did not plan on?
Yeah, well, we just passed the 26-year mark. Tim died on March 6th of 1992. He was 16 years old at the time. The way I usually tell it is that Friday morning, I saw Tim off to school. His buddy Mark came up in his big orange pickup truck and picked him up for school. And the next time I saw Tim, he was in his casket at the funeral home here in Hastings. So no one ever, I mean, a parent, you can't even make yourself think that because it's such a horrible thought. And you've got kids, so it's like who would sit around and imagine that, right? Why wouldn't you do that?
Right.
So, but it is what happened. And Tim was at a party. There was just maybe 10, 12 kids there. And I always say there was a combination which turned out to be deadly. There was a dozen or so kids, teenagers with their yet to be developed brains.
Right.
Because it's true. I'm not insulting them. It's just plain true, especially young boys.
Yes.
They're immortal. Nothing's going to happen to them, right?
Right.
And there was beer. And there was a 19-year-old acquaintance with a .44 caliber Magnum handgun. And through a lot of people being irresponsible, and including Tim, making poor choices, he ended up being shot, by the owner of the gun. So. Yeah.
Wow. And that night, something you mentioned in your book, Dick, your husband, had to be escorted.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
Dick
and
was, we're from southwestern Minnesota, out near Redwood Falls, and Dick had been gone for a few days. He was out staying at my mom and dad's house, working on his work van with my dad, who was a mechanic. And that night of March 6th that year, it was this foggy, and it covered at least the southern half of the state, because it was so foggy that it took Dick, escorted from county line to county line with the sheriff's departments. Lenny, our sheriff here at the time, he helped me, or he arranged for that, because I thought the last thing Dick needs to do is get in a car and drive home with the little bit of news he had. And so they arranged for him to, a sheriff deputy picked him up at my mom and dad's house. They took him to the next county line, because it's 110 miles west of here. And a trip that usually took us, 2 hours and 15 minutes, took about 4.5 hours. Because of the fog and because, of course, so he sat, poor guy, he sat in the back of a squad car. These guys didn't know that we're driving. They didn't know. They were so busy concentrating on being able to see in front of them. And so it was like 4:30 in the morning before he got home. I had found out about 11 o'clock that night that Tim had died. But for me, I was surrounded. So many, I don't know. I've thought back to that time. It's like there was not cell phones or texting or any of that.
Right.
The way news spreads now, that Facebook knows about it almost before you do, kind of thing.
Because of what year was this again?
92.
92.
So there was no media like that, and so, but somehow the word got back, and people just started showing up, kids and hockey parents and church family and all that. So
you mentioned in your book there was a moment when you and Dick said a prayer.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
Well, this came when Dick was riding back, as I just described. He was like having the struggle already with God, saying, I don't know how I'm going to do this, because your first reaction is somebody killed my boy. And somebody has to pay for that. I mean, that's, the human part of us just wants to see justice and get even. And he said he knew while he was thinking this, like, I can't do this. I can't work. This isn't going to work. And so he really just felt like he had this, this message, that came through his head and into his heart that said, you need to let go of the destructive anger. You need to let that go. So when he came home and everybody had finally left our house, we sat down and we just held hands on the couch in those pre-dawn hours, and we just said a simple prayer and said, Lord, would you take the destructive anger from us? And Tom, that's exactly what happened. And I really do think even the people involved on the other side of all this, know that we didn't reach out in anger at all. Instead, we were able to turn to forgiveness, and I think that prayer was the beginning of changing the whole trajectory of where our lives would have gone, because we all know people who live with anger and resentment and it's not a happy life, you know.
Oh.
There's no way to move through that if you have to let go of some of that. I mean, that's my belief. That's really what I believe in, and we were blessed by it. So,
you know, I've seen you around a lot, and you always have seemed like such a bright, positive woman. Has like this twinkle in your eye, and shocked, I have to admit, to hear the story that you have been through, and to believe that's the same woman has been through that. Yeah. How do you do it?
Well,
and I think many in town would agree with me on that too.
Yeah.
You're just known as like a super positive.
Well, thank you.
Happy woman.
I try to be. I mean, I want to, you know, because I think that's contagious.
Yeah.
You know, we need more happiness in our lives. We don't need any more sadness. There's plenty of that to go around. But, you know, I reference, in some of my writing, I've talked about digging your well before you get thirsty. And I think when we spend time putting into the lives of others, being there and helping people pick up the pieces of their lives sometimes, or just being a good neighbor, or you know, being a positive influence in our schools or our churches or wherever, when the chips are down for us, it comes back. I said something like a boomerang, and somebody said, "Do you know that you have to throw a boomerang a certain way for it to come back to you?" I said, "Okay, well, forget that part, but I still am going to say it's kind of like a boomerang, because what we put out comes back, right?"
Right.
I think that's
I
true.
agree. And
so we were really well cared for during that most horrible time in our lives, and I guess I had to believe, well, I guess somehow people were reciprocating that we were people who they knew and cared about, and we'd done the same for them. So, and I continue to see that working out in our lives, you know, years after that with different situations. And it makes you want to be that person for somebody else, because it's like, I've been blessed to be a blessing then. That's how I see it.
You're a sought-after speaker, like we talked about. You have many commitments, and you're a published author. So you know a little something about grief and gone through what you've gone through. So I'm very curious to hear it in broad terms. Like, what is your philosophy on grief? Is it you hear about the stages and the process?
Well, you know, I wish I could say, you know, here's a book, you know, and that once you get through the anger and the bartering and all that, then you'll just go along, and it should be just this many months. Because people ask me all the time when I say, well, I remember when this happened, or when I did this, and they always say, especially people new in grief, they go, well, how long was that? When was that happened? It's like, I don't know. You know, I didn't journal back then. I probably should have, but it really doesn't matter, because it's going to be different for all of us. If I was able to accomplish this at 6 months since his death, it doesn't mean anything to someone else, because that doesn't mean that at 6 months you should be able to this, then this, and this. So, you know, I think there's some people who have some fortitude that not everyone has. Right. I mean, but I think it's also, resilience is a muscle. We're not born with resilience. I think it's something it's like training. It's like going to the gym. We can build that in ourselves through surrounding ourselves with the right people, the right information we're letting into our head, what we watch, what we read. You know, how much time do we spend working on things that improve us? You know, and faith for us, over the umbrella over all of it for us was our faith. And that faith family was a huge part of our recovery, you know, and continues to be.
You talk about choosing a fork in the road, or hitting a fork in the road, and choosing a bitter, I really like this one,
yes.
to choose a bitter life or a better life.
Yeah, and as I said in the journal, Tom, I remember sitting at the intersection of 42 and 55, just out west of town here, and it was like I got this vision from God that said, you know, one way or the other, you know, what are you going to do with this? And I probably was at a low point when that happened, and I just felt like, yeah, you're right, I can't carry this like this anymore. And it didn't, you know, so if you're to the right, it's a better life. If you're to the left, it's going to be a bitter life. And I didn't want to be a bitter person. I knew people who were bitter, and I now understood that something sad or bad happened to them, and for whatever reason they chose to go the other direction, and they chose to live out the rest of their lives like that. I mean, I was only 37 years old when Tim died. I thought, well, if God keeps me here to be an old woman, that's a long time to be bitter. and make my life miserable and anybody else around me. Who people don't stay around you long when you're like that. People don't really enjoy spending time with people who are, and we give people time. It's like, yeah, you can be bitter for a while, or you can be sad, or you can have your pity party, but you can't stay there because our society doesn't put up with it very long. People think you should be better long before it's even possible when something like this happens, because they don't know. If they've never walked the path, they don't know.
You bring up society. I would like to talk about society and how you feel the society handles grief. Where are we at? Is there a lot of work left to be done, or are they much further ahead than you were?
Well, I think there's more resources now, far more. When Tim died, we did join Compassionate Friends, which has been, I don't know how long Compassionate Friends have been around, but they're an international organization that is just for people who have lost children. So they're just simply for bereaved parents. And we went there within 3 weeks after Tim's death. It was very helpful. There's something about, just like any support group, whatever you're going to support group for, whether it's alcoholism or drugs or whatever, there's some comfort in knowing I don't have to explain myself here. You all get it. Well, the same is true with, the death of a child. We didn't have to, and if we were just in a quiet mood that night, we could be quiet and not say a word. If we were angry, we could talk about that. If we were sad about that his birthday's tomorrow, everybody went just like, you just get these, yeah. And so, but there wasn't a lot of other things. There was not a general grief support group. It was limited, and goodness, now you can Google grief on, and there's tons of articles and blogs and posts and Facebook pages, and there's so much out there now. That part is better. When it comes right down to it, are we better at the face-to-face time with someone who's grieved? Do we feel more comfortable knowing what to say or do? I don't know. I mean, some people maybe, but I think we still have a long ways. I think it's our society that wants everything to keep moving and that we don't get stuck too long here. And that's easier to say when you're not the one dealing with it every hour of your life.
What would you advise, going along that, what would you advise to those watching that never experienced grief, but perhaps know somebody that's going through grief, and they're not sure what to do or what to say? What do you say to them?
So we talked about this little poem. I'm going to read this now. It's called "The Elephant in the Room." It's written by Terry Kettering. There's an elephant in the room. It's large and squatting, so it's hard to get around it. Yet we squeeze by with, "How are you?" and "I'm fine," and 1,000 other forms of trivial chatter. We talk about the weather. We talk about work. We talk about everything else except the elephant in the room. There's an elephant in the room. We all know it's there. We are thinking about the elephant as we talk together. It is constantly on our minds, for you see, it's a very large elephant. It has hurt us all. But we don't talk about the elephant in the room. Oh, please say his name. Oh, please say his name again. Oh, please, let's talk about the elephant in the room. For if we talk about his death, perhaps we can talk about his life. Can I say his name to you and not have you look away? For if I cannot, then you are leaving me alone in a room with an elephant.
Wow. So true.
So so back to your question, we need to be better at saying their name. Dick always tells people, Tim's name is music to our ears. And even 26 years later, just within the last year or so, we've had someone come to us and share a story about Tim at their son's birthday party, and we had someone not long ago that they were going through all their old photos, and they found a couple pictures of Tim as a playmate to one of their kids, and they said, we thought maybe you'd like these, so they mailed them to us.
Oh.
Where some might go, I don't know, it's been so long, maybe it's like, I would say there's no statute of limitation on having empathy and caring for other people, no matter what. So if you think about it, then just do it. I think, early on, keeping in touch with a phone call, a text, sending a card, of course. And, again, it doesn't matter if the death was a month away. If you didn't send a month ago, if you didn't send the card, actually it's probably more appreciated now than it would have been a month ago, because you're so bombarded with so many things that you don't even remember the cards. You don't.
Wow.
We still have all our cards downstairs, and we have not looked through them since the day we got them. And we're going to do that one of these days.
Oh.
it'll be difficult. We
Right.
started looking through old photographs just over the snowy weekend, and it was hard. It made me sad because so many memories of Tim as a little boy, and all that stuff that it kind of, you want memories to be sweet, but when a child dies, I find it harder to find the sweetness in all of it because it was so short.
Yeah.
But so I think just being there for those people, and if you know the person who died, record put their birthday on your calendar, send a note to someone on that birthday, the anniversary of their death. If it's a spousal loss, their wedding anniversary, you want to if you can recognize that. People are getting better at posting on Facebook now, so we're reminded because they post something for us to remember. Then you can make you can put a comment down. Is it as personal? No, but that's the society we've kind of become, I'm afraid. But it's not the same as saying, you know what, I know you like Caribou, let me pick one up, I'll come on over. Or now finally we have dry streets again.
Yes.
Let's just go for a walk,
Right.
Let's go down by the river and take a walk, and maybe we'll grab lunch. And being sensitive to those people, let the griever take the lead, because every time you're together, it doesn't mean they want to talk about it. So if you sense that they do, if they say something, or if they're weepy, and to say if you knew the person who died well enough to say, you know what, I miss him too. Can I tell you a story? Because what we want is for people to remember that they lived. Again, especially with child loss, one of our greatest fears is people will forget that they ever were here. Because they didn't, if they died younger, they didn't have as many years to make an impact and to broaden their circle of people that they could influence and know. So, it's difficult, and I understand the uncomfortable part of it, but there's times when I stand in line at a funeral or the visitation beforehand, and I overhear people saying, they watch the person next to the casket or the urn or whatever it might be, and like, wow, she's so strong. She really seems to be doing well. And inside I'm screaming when I hear that, because it's like, if you could follow her home, sit in the corner of her bedroom in the middle of the night, and you'll see that she's not strong. And really, people like us who are grievers, we insulted is a strong word, but we don't like when people tell us, you're so strong. You're just so strong. Because we know that we're not that strong. We maybe can hold it together when we're at Walmart or, at church or whatever, but we're not strong. How can you be? Why would you? You shouldn't have to be.
That brings up the big question, does one ever get over it?
No, not at all. No, the grief part we can't do anything about, because it is the physical manifestation of a pain that is as great as it is. And so we have the physical and the emotional and the mental and the spiritual battles that we fight with grief, because it attacks every part of our being, and that's the grief part that everyone will experience. Now, whether you want to bury it, whether you want to work more hours, and drop into bed at midnight so you can get up at 6 the next morning and do it again, so you are so busy and exhausted that you can't deal with it. That's one way to do it. But I have seen far too many people who show up in life and there's another loss, maybe not even as tragic as the one that they had ignored all these years. And now they're back coming to a group or needing to go see a counselor or a therapist, which is fine. If that's what you need to do it. Because they look back. Now they're wiser about how to deal with their grief, and they went, I never did deal with his grief 5 years ago or 10 years ago. So it's something to be aware of. Now, mourning is the choice you make to take it to the streets, so to speak, where we continue to talk about it, and we continue, but to use it in a way that isn't, it doesn't look like grief. I guess it's kind of how I worked through mine is I still mourn the loss of Tim and of Oleg, but I've found a way to channel it. And it doesn't mean that I don't get down, and that sometimes I can, okay, I've had enough grieving people for a little while. I think I need a break, because it's sad, and I feel their pain. And when they've just started out on this journey, I'm thinking, you have no idea how hard it's going to get before it gets any easier.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, Donna, I believe we're running out of time, but I cannot thank you enough for inviting us in your home, and I am so happy we had this
Yes,
talk.
thank you.
And I thank you for doing so.
You bet.
Again, with Donna Mathiowetz, local inspirational speaker and a published author, here with this book, A Journal for Your Journey. Again, I highly recommend it. You can purchase it on Donna's website, unfinishedbydesign.com. Unfinishedbydesign.com. Donna, thank you so much again.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yes. And thank you folks at home for watching. We'll see you next time.